You ever get that feeling? Like a shiver down your spine? When you realize the 2024 election is practically breathing down our necks.
Oh, absolutely.
That's what it feels like, diving deep into the Tour Democrats subreddit. The energy there is unreal.
It really
It's like
is.
you're stepping into a room and everyone's kind of nervous but also super excited, all about the latest polls, and the news, obviously,
Right, right.
and just that feeling of anticipation
Yeah, you can really sense
for
that.
whatever might happen.
What's so interesting about looking at a place like that online community, is you get this, well, it's unfiltered, right?
Yeah,
It's like a raw look at what voters are really worried about, what they're thinking.
exactly. Not just the headlines, but real people with, real anxieties and hopes for the future. And speaking of anxieties, one post that really stood out from this deep dive was, well, it was about voter registration
Mm.
in Georgia, of all places.
Okay, yeah.
Seems like a lot of people are finding their registration status has changed,
Oh, no.
like mysteriously.
Wow.
And the worst part, today's October 7th, tomorrow, like literally tomorrow, is the last day to register in Georgia.
Oh, wow. So anyone listening,
I know, right?
if you're in Georgia, get on that.
Seriously. It's a big deal, right? This whole thing about voter registration, sadly, it's not new.
No, not at all.
But it just reminds us, how important this stuff is.
It's fundamental.
Voting rights, access to voting, all of it.
Couldn't agree more. No matter where you are, everyone listening, please check your registration.
Please.
Seriously, make sure your voice is heard.
Don't let some bureaucratic mess stop you from voting.
Right.
And, something else that can really make or break an election.
Yeah.
Well, we saw a lot of discussion about it. The Hurricane Helene relief efforts, or should I say, the lack of.
Right, right.
One user was, well, they seem pretty frustrated, talking about how additional funding is delayed, still hasn't reached the people who need it in the Florida Panhandle.
That's got to be incredibly disheartening.
Right. It's like this feeling we're seeing more and more of as we get closer to the election.
I'd say so.
People are frustrated with all the partisan gridlock and, especially when it comes to something as crucial as disaster relief.
People are looking for leadership that actually cares. That puts its citizens first, not political games.
It's a good reality check,
Yeah.
Because behind all the polls and the news cycles, there are real people
Mm-hmm.
with real problems.
Mm,
And it can feel like the whole political world is just totally out of touch with that reality.
definitely. Speaking of out of touch, did you see that poll? The one about Florida?
Oh, yeah. Florida, can you believe it?
Nearing tough-up status? Wild.
That's not something you see every day.
Not every day, no. I mean, we always think of Florida as a battleground state, of course.
Right.
But this is different.
Totally.
To see it potentially slip into this uncertain territory.
I know.
It's significant.
Big time.
It really could mean that the whole race is a lot tighter than people thought.
Keeps things interesting, that's for sure.
That's for sure.
And speaking of interesting, seems like we're not the only ones glued to this election. Or Democrats is buzzing about all the celebrities coming out of the woodwork.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, endorsements, campaign appearances, the whole 9 yards. You've got Obama out there again, stumping for Harris.
Yeah.
It kind of taps into that whole idea of legacy,
Definitely.
passing the torch.
And then you've got these A-list celebrities, like, everywhere in Arizona getting out the vote.
Oh, yeah.
It's really something. It makes you think about how those old school tactics are still around, even with social media and all that.
It really does. Makes you wonder, can a selfie with a movie star actually change someone's vote these days?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I mean, some people probably don't care at all,
True.
but others, especially younger voters, they might find it exciting, motivating.
Right, right.
It all comes down to how it comes across,
Yeah, does it feel genuine?
Exactly, and does it actually speak to what those voters already care about?
It's like trying to crack the code of influence, and it's always changing.
Absolutely, always changing. Speaking of influence, this next one's a doozy. We saw quite a bit about Elon Musk.
Oh boy, what's he up to now?
And no, it's not about spaceships this time.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
This is where things get really interesting, especially from a political analysis point of view.
I bet. So what's the deal with Musk?
Well, there are these allegations going around about him paying people directly in those key swing states.
Oh wow, seriously.
And then there's the whole thing with his mother allegedly encouraging people to, well, let's just say, not follow election rules.
Wow, that's really...
It's a lot, right? But we have to be careful here.
Right, of course.
These are just allegations at this point.
Okay, so nothing's been proven yet.
Exactly. But they do raise some big questions, even if they turn out to be completely false.
About what?
About influence, obviously. People are already worried about rich people having too much power in elections.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And these stories, true or not, they feed into that fear,
Hmm.
that worry about whether elections are really fair.
Yeah, it's like this underlying current of anxiety.
Exactly. People want to know that their vote actually counts, that the process is transparent.
Of course.
And stories like this, they just bring all of that to the surface.
It makes you think, like, where do we draw the line? What's okay, what's not, when it comes to campaigning and money and power?
It's complicated, that's for sure. But the fact that people are talking about it, debating it, especially under Democrats, that's important.
Absolutely. And speaking of sparking debate, there was another topic that really got people going. A lot of posts about an article discussing a certain candidate.
I think I know the one.
It was getting into some pretty sensitive territory, you could say.
Yeah, the article was talking about potential cognitive decline in that candidate.
And that's a tough one to talk about.
It really is.
Because on the one hand, you have legitimate concerns about whether someone's up to the job, right?
Right, being president is a demanding job, no doubt about it.
But then there's also the risk of spreading rumors, you know, or even just being insensitive.
It's a delicate balance, for sure.
It feels like it's way too easy for something like that to become political,
Totally.
with both sides accusing each other of using it for their own gain.
Exactly, and that's why it's so important for voters to be careful.
What do you mean?
Think critically. Don't just believe everything you read.
Yeah, completely.
Look at the sources. Consider the biases. It's about being informed, Especially these days when information and misinformation spreads like wildfire online.
Yeah, it's a good point. You really have to be careful these days. It's easy to get swept up in it all.
It really is. And that actually reminds me, going through all these threads, on Contra Democrats, I noticed something, like a recurring theme almost.
Like what?
It wasn't just about the issues themselves, it was more like this underlying feeling. It's hard to describe, almost a sense of, I don't know, fragility, maybe?
Fragility. Interesting. I can see it. It's like everyone knows how important this election is.
Exactly.
And that the choices we make now will have, really long-lasting consequences.
Right. And that can be a lot to handle. It creates this feeling of, I don't know, like walking a tightrope.
Totally. Between hope and this, like, nagging uncertainty.
Exactly. It's like everyone's holding their breath, waiting to see what happens.
It's true. And that's why these online spaces like Nerd Democrats are so fascinating. You get this glimpse into how people are actually dealing with all of it, the anxiety, the uncertainty.
Absolutely. It's like a real-time look at how they're processing everything.
Exactly. And how they're talking about it, coming up with strategies.
And ultimately how they're trying to turn that anxiety into action.
Which is really what it's all about, right?
Absolutely.
So for our listeners out there, what would you say? What are the big takeaways from all of this, from this deep dive into Democrats?
Well, if I had to pick one thing, it's the importance of getting involved, of being an active participant.
Yeah, like that.
These communities, even though they're just a small part of the bigger picture,
Right.
they show us how important it is to stay informed,
Definitely.
to talk to each other, to make your voice heard, whether it's voting, volunteering, even just having thoughtful conversations.
All of it matters.
Absolutely. Every little bit counts.
It's easy to feel overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Especially when everything feels so uncertain.
Oh, for sure.
Like with all the misinformation and the partisan fighting, it's exhausting.
I hear you.
But at the end of the day, we can't forget that we still have power.
That's right.
To shape the future. And it starts with each of us,
It really does.
Staying informed, getting involved, and never taking our own voices for granted.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And you know what else? It's easy to forget. With all the algorithms and headlines and everything, there are real people behind all of it. We're all just trying to figure things out, right?
That's true.
And these online spaces, they remind us that even when we disagree, there's still value in listening to each other, trying to understand.
That's a really important point. Maybe the most important one.
It's easy to forget in the heat of the moment.
It really is. So as you continue on your own deep dive into the online world of politics, remember to keep an open mind.
Yes.
Be critical, of course, but be respectful too.
Absolutely.
Engage in those tough conversations and never underestimate the power of your own voice.
Well said.
Because in the end, it's not just about the politicians, right? It's about all of us. We all have a role to play in shaping the future.